I want to start by telling you what kind of marriage I thought I had, because I think that matters. I think the specific texture of the life I believed I was living is important context for understanding how completely and structurally I was deceived, and also for understanding the thing that happened when I drove 3 hours to confront a woman who turned out to be just as deceived as I was. My name is Simone. I'm 41 years old. I live outside of Columbus, Ohio. And for 11 years, I was married to a man named David Archer, who was, by every observable measure, a devoted and present husband. I want to be precise about that word, devoted, because I've since had people in my life suggest that there must have been signs I missed, red flags I ignored, some willful blindness on my part that enabled what he was doing. And I understand that impulse, because it is deeply comforting to believe that this kind of deception comes with a warning system, that if you're paying close enough attention, you'll see it coming. It's comforting because it suggests you would have been smarter, that it wouldn't have happened to you. I was paying attention. There were no flags. David and I met when I was 26 and he was 28, at a mutual friend's birthday party in downtown Columbus. He was a civil engineer, the kind of stable, concrete profession that my mother had always quietly hoped I'd find in a partner. Not because she was mercenary, but because she had grown up with not enough and wanted better for me. He was not flashy. He was steady and dry-humored and remembered things, the small, specific things that signaled genuine attention, like the name of my college roommate I had mentioned once in passing, or that I had a complicated relationship with my older brother that I didn't often talk about. He listened in a way that felt active and real. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, married in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside the city when I was 29. We bought a house. I continued my career in healthcare administration, moved into a director-level role by my mid-30s. David's engineering career was steady and well compensated. We were not rich, but we were comfortable, which I never stopped being grateful for because I remembered my mother working 2 jobs, and I had promised myself I would not take comfort for granted. We did not have children. This was a decision that evolved over the years from not yet to probably not to a quiet, mutual acknowledgement that it was not going to be part of our life, which I had made a genuine peace with, not without grief, but peace. We had built a life around each other in the particular way that childless couples sometimes do, with a level of companionship and interdependence that I found sustaining. David was my person. That was the phrase I used in my own head, and I was not embarrassed by it. He traveled for work. This is the part where people's eyebrows go up, and I understand why, but I need you to understand how thoroughly legitimate his professional life appeared. Civil engineering projects are long-term, geographically distributed, and require periodic site presence. He worked on infrastructure projects across Ohio and neighboring states, and it was not unusual for him to spend several days a week away, home on weekends and some weekdays, phone accessible and video call present when he wasn't physically there. His company was real. His projects were real. I had met his colleagues. I had attended his company's holiday parties. His professional life was a genuine, verifiable, existing thing. It was also, I now understand, the infrastructure of his deception. Not fabricated, real, but arranged. The travel schedule that kept him away multiple days a week was not manufactured. It was selected. He had, I learned later, specifically built his career around project work that justified extended absences because it gave him the architecture he needed. He had been deliberate about this in a way that I find difficult to fully comprehend even now, because the deliberateness implies a level of sustained planning and cold calculation that is almost impossible to reconcile with the man who remembered my college roommate's name and held my hand through my mother's hip surgery. The discovery was not cinematic. I did not find a receipt or a text message or lipstick on a collar. The discovery was a phone call from a number I didn't recognize on a Wednesday afternoon in November from a woman who introduced herself as Karen Archer. Archer. My last name. Her last name. She said very carefully that she was calling because she had found my number in her husband's phone contacts listed under a name that was clearly a disguise. He had apparently saved me as a work contact with a modified name, and she had done enough searching in the days prior to calling me to believe that I might be someone who needed to know what she had found. She said she was sorry to make this call. She sounded on the phone like someone who had rehearsed those words many times and was still finding them insufficient. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't remember deciding to sit down. I was simply on the floor with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to a woman tell me that her husband's name was David Archer, that they had been married for 9 years, that they had 2 children, a son who was 7 and a daughter who was 5, and that they lived in a suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 3 hours from Columbus. She had found, in a file on his personal laptop, documentation, financial documentation specifically, a second bank account he had maintained separately, records of payments, a folder of what appeared to be photographs and documents related to a life she had not known about. She had found, among other things, photos of me, of David and me, of our house. I cannot adequately describe what it feels like to have the architecture of your life dismantled in a single phone call. I've tried to find language for it in the year and a half since, and the closest I can get is this. It felt like being told that the ground under your feet was not ground at all, that what you had been standing on for 11 years was a painting of a floor, and the moment you looked at it directly, you fell through. Karen and I talked for over an hour that first call. We were both, I think, in a state of shock that made us strangely functional, the way people in accidents sometimes describe feeling very calm and very clear right before the pain arrives. We exchanged information carefully. We confirmed dates, timelines, details. David had met Karen 8 months after he and I started dating. They had been together, in some form, for 12 years. They had been married 2 years after David and I had been married. Their children had been born during our marriage, while David was flying back and forth between a life in Pittsburgh and a life in Columbus, maintaining both with an apparent effortlessness that I will never stop finding staggering. At the end of the call, Karen said something I wasn't expecting. She said, "I'd like to meet you in person if you're willing. I think there are things that would be better talked about face to face. And I could be wrong about this, but I think we might need each other to get through what comes next." I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 days, during which David came home from what I now understood was his other life, and I watched him move through our house with the same ease and familiarity he always had. And I felt a dissociation so profound that I twice had to excuse myself to another room to breathe through it. I did not confront him immediately. I was not ready, and I also needed time to understand what I knew before I turned it into a confrontation I couldn't take back. On the 3rd day, I called Karen and said I would drive to Pittsburgh. David was scheduled to be in Columbus that weekend, home with me, I now understood, because he had presumably told Karen he was traveling for work. I told him I was visiting a friend. He kissed me goodbye. He told me to drive safe. He stood on the porch of the house we had chosen together and waved as I backed out of the driveway. I cried for the first 45 minutes of the drive. Then I stopped because I needed to see clearly, and I drove the rest of the way in a silence that felt like the inside of something sealed. Karen's house was in a suburb I'll keep vague, a neighborhood of neat lawns and 2-car garages, the specific visual vocabulary of comfortable family life. I parked in front and sat in my car for a few minutes, and then I got out, walked to the door, and knocked. She opened the door within seconds, which told me she had been watching for me, and we stood there for a moment looking at each other in the way that you look at someone when you are trying to reconcile the abstract with the actual. She was 43, 2 years older than me, with the kind of face that looked like it had been very pretty and was still handsome, with eyes that were red-rimmed but dry. She had been crying but had stopped, I suspected, specifically to be present for this. And she was holding something, a framed photograph pressed against her chest with one hand, the image facing out. It took me a moment to process what I was seeing. It was a photo of David and me from our wedding. She hadn't been holding it as some kind of statement or confrontation. She had been looking at it when I knocked, apparently, and had simply not set it down in time. She looked at her own hand holding it as if she had forgotten it was there, and then she set it on the hall table just inside the door, face down, with a care that felt like the most devastating thing I had ever witnessed. I stepped inside. She closed the door. Her children were at her mother's house for the day. She had arranged that, she said, because she didn't know what this conversation was going to be. We went to the kitchen and she made tea, and we sat at her kitchen table, and we talked for 4 hours. I cannot tell you everything that came out in those 4 hours because some of it belongs to Karen and some of it belongs to the privacy of a situation that involved children who are innocent and that I have no desire to expose further than necessary. What I can tell you is that the general shape of what emerged was this. We had both been lied to with equal thoroughness and equal commitment. There was no original. There was no copy. We were not arranged in a hierarchy of realness, primary relationship, secondary relationship, because David had apparently not organized his life that way in his own mind. Or if he had never revealed it through any observable inconsistency in how he treated either of us. Karen showed me things from his file on her laptop, documents, financial records, a calendar system he had maintained to track the two schedules. It was meticulous. It was the work of someone who had treated the management of 2 lives as a logistical project with the same careful systems thinking he brought to civil infrastructure. It was, in its way, a masterpiece of organized deception, and I say that with the full understanding of how horrifying it is that this is what his abilities had been applied to. He had purchased 2 wedding rings, identical in design, from the same jeweler. Karen showed me hers. It was the same as mine. He had apparently decided that the safest lie was the most consistent one, that parallel was more sustainable than different. He had built 2 versions of the same life and moved between them. Karen's children had been told their father traveled extensively for work. Her 7-year-old son, she told me, had recently started complaining that his dad was away too much. She had reassured the child that Daddy's job was important and that he was always coming back. She said this to me with an expression I don't have words for. The question of what to do next was simultaneously simple and catastrophic. We both understood that the marriage, both marriages, if what David and Karen had could be called a marriage given that it was legally impossible, were over. That was not a question. Neither of us spent time on it. The question was how to end it, what legal reality looked like, and what the experience of the 2 children was going to be as this unraveled, which was the thing Karen returned to repeatedly and that I understood was the right thing to return to, even though it was not my immediate burden in the way it was hers. We found an attorney together. Not the same one, but the same referral, a family law specialist who had seen, apparently, iterations of this situation before, which was itself a disturbing thing to learn. Bigamy is illegal. David's second marriage, his marriage to Karen, was not legally valid. She was not, in the eyes of the law, his wife. Their children were legally his children. He had legal obligations to them that existed regardless of what any of us decided about anything else. I confronted David when I got home. I will not detail that conversation at length, partly because it is still difficult to revisit, and partly because whatever he said in his defense was so structurally inadequate to the situation that it barely registered as language. He cried. He said he loved us both, which was the sentence that finally broke through the numbness I had been operating in and made me feel something clean and specific: fury. He said he had never meant to hurt anyone. He said it had started small and grown beyond what he knew how to stop. He said many things that were probably true, and none of which constituted anything approaching a sufficient explanation. I asked him to leave that night. He left. I sat alone in the house we had chosen together and looked at the walls and the furniture and the accumulated physical evidence of 11 years and felt the specific grief of realizing that none of it was what it had appeared to be. Not destroyed. The experiences were real, the moments were real in some technical sense, but recontextualized so completely that I couldn't find stable ground in a single memory. The legal process was long and ugly in the way these things always are. David's financial situation was complicated by the existence of two households and the question of support obligations, which the court sorted out in ways that were equitable to Karen's children and somewhat less equitable to me, which I accepted because those children did not ask for any of this and they needed stability. I got the house eventually. I got a financial settlement that was fair but not generous. I got my name back. I returned to my maiden name within months of filing and felt in that small bureaucratic act something that functioned like reclamation. Karen and I have stayed in contact. This is the part that surprises people most when I tell the story. We text periodically. We have met in person 3 more times, twice for practical reasons related to the legal process, and once for no practical reason at all. We drove to a midpoint city between Columbus and Pittsburgh and had lunch and talked for 3 hours about everything except David, which was the correct approach, and we both knew it without discussing it. She is rebuilding. Her children are in therapy, which they are handling with the resilience that children sometimes demonstrate in ways that make adults feel ashamed of their own fragility. Her older child asked her recently whether their dad was a bad person, and she told me, she said, "He did bad things. That is what I know." And I thought that was exactly right. I am rebuilding too. I am 41 years old, and I am learning, with the assistance of a very good therapist and a very patient group of friends, how to trust the ground under my feet again, how to look at a person and believe what I'm seeing without the background hum of wondering what I'm not seeing. It is slow work. It is necessary work. I have dated once since the divorce. Briefly, a man I met through a mutual friend, a decent person who was patient with my particular post-David brand of hypervigilance, and who I eventually ended things with, not because he had done anything wrong, but because I needed to be alone for longer than I had been. I needed to find out what my life looked like when it was only mine, when I was not organized around another person's presence or absence, when I was not filling in the spaces someone else had defined. The house sold last spring. I bought a smaller place, a condo closer to downtown Columbus, that I have furnished slowly and deliberately with things I chose entirely for myself, by my own criteria, with no negotiation or compromise. There is something almost embarrassingly satisfying about a space that reflects no one but you. I recommend it. David pled guilty to bigamy charges. He received a suspended sentence and significant fines. He is not in my life in any form. He is in Karen's children's lives because they are his children, and that is a fact that gets dissolved by his behavior, but that is her situation to navigate, and she does so with a grace I genuinely admire. The photograph, his and my wedding photo, the one Karen was holding when she opened the door, I don't know what happened to it. I assume she threw it away. I threw away mine, though it took me longer than I expected. There was a night about 6 months after the divorce when I sat on my bedroom floor with a box of photographs and went through all of them, and it was exactly as hard as you would imagine. And then I put the wedding photos in a separate bag and put the rest back in the box, and the next morning I took the bag to the trash, and that was that. What I held on to was a different photograph, one from our first year of dating, before any of the weight of what came after had accumulated. David is barely in it. It's mostly me, laughing at something off camera in a park in late summer, with the light coming in at the angle that afternoon light gets in August. I look happy in a way that is completely uncomplicated. I look like a person who is just standing in good light, laughing at something funny, entirely unaware of anything that is coming. I kept that photograph because the happiness in it was real and mine, because he didn't make me happy in that moment. The light did, the joke did, the afternoon did.
Because I was there before him, and I am here after him, and the woman in that photograph is still me, just older and considerably less naive, and in possession of a condo that is entirely her own. That's enough. That's actually enough.